So now that we've learned about the aurora lights and how they're basically the gases that cause the different colors, let's get started with creating our very own. So on your paper, you can use a plate, you could do a different design shape, whatever it is that you would like to create your scene within. I'm using a paper plate to draw myself a circle, and within this, I'm going to create my landscape as if I'm out there observing these beautiful lights. So now on here, think about where you want the landscape to be. The focal point is going to be the lights in the sky. So I don't want to have everything be too high at the top. So using my pen, and you're going to be using a pen as well in this project, I want you to start drawing your landscape. You can look up different images to help guide you in your decision. Here you can see I have my iPad open to a variety of different pictures to inspire me. And I'm drawn more towards imagining that I'm out camping in one of those domes that you can observe the lights. And it's snowy. There's a riverbank that has full of ice, and that's what I'm sketching right here. So you can follow along with me if you would like. I'm adding in a little bit of a line and some value here so it makes it look more like the water is deep. And here's just some of the erosion or that the hills are up higher than the water here. It gives a little bit of a shadow effect. Think about when you're adding in value, things that are further in the back are probably going to be a little bit darker. As objects get closer to each other, that's where it's going to be the darkest. And right now I'm just adding in some lines to kind of add some shadow and value of where, the snow doesn't look so flat. So take your time and design the landscape that you're most interested in creating for your space design here. You'll also notice that whenever you're drawing in perspective, and for example, here with the water, things that are in the distance always need to be made smaller or closer together. And things that are going to be right there in front of you as the viewer needs to be larger. So consider that when you're making your objects and the landscape, that in the back of your landscape, trees are always going to appear smaller, harder to see the detail. Trees that are up close, you can see the detail really well. When I start adding in trees, I'm going to draw just a regular line. And on one side, I'm going to have the lines going down. The same direction on the other side is just switched. So a lot of people usually do the lines and then draw what looks like an arrow on each, and you can make them closer together, further apart. All trees are never the same size. So as you're creating your forest background based off of the picture that you have chosen, really take your time and fill in that landscape. Another trick as you're adding in the landscape is to just draw the lines for where you want your trees to go. And this just gives you a better idea as you're building it, exactly how much coverage that you want to have or not have. So you can see here I did the lines, some larger, some smaller. I added in some footprints so it looks like, somebody was walking out in the snow. And just keep going through. It's going to take you some time. I did speed this up, but as you're going through, just really take your time, go into a peaceful kind of feeling and zone, and add in those details. Think about also maybe where you want some larger trees closer to you. And then as you're going through, start adding in some value. So up here, I just started adding in some darker shading for the trees further in the back, as you can see. So as you're adding in that value, remember again, whenever we do our shading, we always have the darkest thing further in the back or closest to something. And as it works away, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So what I'm doing here is I'm just having it darker, but then I'm going through and just adding some shade with my pen and very lightly keeping it as the further away the lines are from each other, the more it's going to look lighter. And the closer the lines are to each other, the darker it's going to look. So I'll show you a couple examples here of how you can add in some texture and shading. Whenever you're working with shading, you're always working in stages. It's easier to get something to get darker, and it's harder to make something lighter. So as you can see, looking throughout my piece here, I really focused on everything in the background being darker and all the lines and the texture back there, whereas the lines are a lot further away from each other. The closer it is to me, the viewer, at least the illusion. Here, my 5 and 3-year-old were doing this along with me, and you can see how they did their trees too. So how do we create these different types of textures? In your sketchbook, now that you've drawn and you've started adding in some different texture and value on your landscape piece, I want to show you a couple techniques. The first technique is called stippling. It's one of my favorite techniques. And with this technique, you're basically working with just dots. So stippling is just a lot of dots. And when you're doing that, you're going to have the closer the dots are together, the darker it's going to look. The further you space the dots, the lighter it will look. So draw a shape and then just gently. So when you're stippling, you're not stabbing the paper or banging it as hard as you can. It's literally just moving your finger like a little pin, going up and down very fast and no pressure at all because ink comes out very well. And you're just doing the dots. So as you're doing it, you might have to go over and over and over and over and over again for the areas for the dark. And then as you're moving it out, the medium is less dots and the light is dots very spaced far apart. So you can kind of get that idea. When I do ink drawings, I usually have some lines and I add in a couple stipple dots to create some texture. The second technique is crosshatching. And crosshatching is basically hashtagging. So doing your lines on a diagonal and then the other way, you make like that texture feel, that woven pattern. The further apart they are, the lighter it looks. The more lines that you add and you keep adding layers and layers and layers on top of it, the darker it's going to look. So cross-hatching is very common in a lot of pencil drawings and ink as well, and it's just a really great way to add in some texture and value to make your drawing come alive and together. So just like we did with the stippling, I would like you to go in and draw a shape. It could be any shape that you're thinking about or are interested in. So if you're feeling like a sphere, why don't you work on that? If you feel like a piece of food and you just want to do the food or a character you enjoy, do that. So think about where the light source is coming in as if there is a flashlight pointing at one spot. That's going to be the brightest. And the further away everything is of that flashlight spot is going to be darker, and that's where the shadow will be behind it. So take your time, play with this technique. Each of these take time, and it's not something that you just pick up immediately. I'm constantly learning and developing my craft as I work and continue, and all of you inspire me. So enjoy that. Go in and add some of these different tricks and techniques into your painting, drawing that we already have, and see where it takes you. Take the time now to grab these materials for this part. You're going to need a water, paintbrush, a plastic bag or aluminum foil, and markers. It could be markers of any particular brand. It does not matter. If you have watercolor in front of you, use watercolor as well. So when you're using marker, the really fun part about marker is that it's washable. So washable marker, the moment it touches water, it's going to start the bleeding process, which means it's going to move and go throughout. So at this point, I highly recommend looking up a few different images or pictures that you find on the web that inspire you. I was really drawn to the one that had, they had these lines and motions that are going up and down, and I'm just applying it onto my paper. You will notice that at first the lines might not move or wake up as quickly as you would like them to, and it's going to look a little rough. But the more water and the more colors you add on there, etc., the paper is going to allow it to bleed a little bit better and move around your color. So you have the option of to get that bright, dark color by putting it directly on your paper. And then you also have the other option of getting the marker on your plastic bag and getting it wet and then painting it on your paper. So if you're looking for ways to find drawing the lines, this is one way, and where you could have put this down first, let this area dry, work throughout your paper, and then come back to it and put the marker color on top and bleed that and just really make things stand out. So just like watercolor, the more water you have, the lighter it's going to be. The less water you have, the darker it's going to be. Regardless, like watercolor, you have to wake up the markers. So whether you wake it up directly on your paper, or you wake it up on your plastic bag, or you mix colors on your plastic bag, work it that way. But do remember that paper, when it's wet, becomes easily broken down where it can rip. So a lot of watercolor artists will pause in an area, let it dry, and we'll come back to it to add another layer on top of it. Similar in oil painting as well, it's always workable. So take your time, really look at the colors, add in some darker values, some lighter values using whatever you have, even if you don't have a variety, and just bring this background to life. One thing that I decided to add is I was really inspired by an image that had the reflection of the northern lights on the water. So I wanted to go in and bring in some of the colors that I placed in the sky, um, think about when you're using water, it's not really going to give you that exact effect that you want it to look. Because we're using markers, we're not really using watercolor paints or using various different size brushes. So this is just experimenting, using color, using the lines that you see in the picture with your markers. So just know, however yours is turning out is perfect and fine and just how it should be. So if you're seeing those streaks, give it some time, let it rest into the paper, and you won't see all of that. Like here, you can see my green marker that I placed on there is a little bit darker than I would like, but I'm going to let it settle for a bit and then come back to it because I could add another layer of a color on top of it, or it'll fade as it dries. So take your time when you're building on your papers. And if you're working on some areas and you want some reflection in your snow, do it lightly. But remember, our focal point, the main idea that we want our viewers to see are those magical northern lights in the sky. So take your time, enjoy, and I'll can't wait to see what you create. Lastly, when you're done, all you need to do is take a, Kleenex or a paper towel and just wipe off the paint from your bag, and that's it. If you have any hard spots that are really wet, you can also tap that on your page and give it a nice effect, similar to how we used our salt in the back. There you go.